Kjære alle sammen, jeg begynner med å si noen ord på norsk. Velkommen til akademisk talkshow. 2 damer og 1 te. Det en liten institusjon som startet i 2015, hvor Norsk senter for menneskerettigheter på Universitetet i Oslo, juridisk fakultet, satte i gang med et såkalt akademisk talkshow. Det vil si at min prominente forsker Anine Kierulf, som kjent for de aller fleste, og jeg, vi inviterer til en gjest og snakker om spørsmål knyttet til rett og galt, ansvar og plikter, individ og samfunn, i menneskerettigheter i en litt større kontekst. Denne undersøkende samtalen i dag altså da et møte med Marina Nemat. Som vi allerede har hørt, så har hun en dramatisk historie å fortelle. Vi skal gå litt mer i detalj når det gjelder hennes liv og hennes historie. Og vi skal ganske fort også slå over på engelsk. Anine.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today, Marina Nemat. Some of the audience have already heard you tell the most dramatic part of your story, so we want to ask you to repeat that, but maybe you could go a little bit further into what Iran was like before the Islamist revolution in 1979, because we tend to see all these pictures on the internet. So this is Iran in the 1960s or in the 1970s, and everyone looks really happy and free and have miniskirts and are doing all the things that we imagine that we all did in those times. And how could this just change so extremely?
You know what, I think, it is true that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So yes, those pictures are true. I wore a bikini, and my dad taught ballroom dancing. I mean, my mother was a hairdresser, and I grew up between the sounds of the cha-cha and the tango and women with really big poofy hair. And yes, on my street, women dressed whatever way they wanted. They wore makeup, they looked pretty, people looked happy. Yes, that's so very true. And every Thursday night, because Friday is a weekend in Iran, we had parties in my house, and people would come and they would be drinking alcohol, and they would be eating, and they would be getting drunk, and they would just simply be having a very good time. And we had a cottage by the Caspian Sea, and that is where I spent my summers, very free, in my bikini or in my shorts and t-shirt, and I would be dancing on the beach with my friends and playing tennis and playing volleyball. And my family were not even rich, we were middle class. So, let's put this into perspective. I mean, at the time, Iran was governed by King, the Shah, we called him, and we had secular laws. So it was not a religious law at all, even though the vast majority of the people of Iran were and are Muslim. I mean, 98 to 99% were and are Muslim. But nevertheless, the law did not discriminate between a Muslim and a religious minority. So today, the testimony of a religious minority, well, the Baha'i have no right whatsoever, let me be clear, but I'm a Christian. So as a Christian, my testimony in Iran is worth half of a Muslim, by the letter of the law. Now, during the time of the Shah, my testimony and the testimony of a Muslim would be equal. As a woman during the time of the Shah, my testimony and the testimony of a man would be equal. But then after the revolution, when the laws became religious laws, my testimony as a woman would be worth half of a man. Now, again, you have to put this into context in the sense of my grandparents, my grandmothers, they were both Russian. So they escaped the 1917 revolution in Russia. They came to Iran. And when my grandmother, my father's mother, Babushka, when she came to Iran, she had to, this is in 1917, 1918, probably 1918, she had to completely cover up. So when she lived in Tehran in 1917, 1918, was very different from the Tehran that I grew up in. It was in the 1930s that the father of the Shah actually made wearing the hijab, the covering, illegal by force. So because he wanted to westernize Iran, he said women should be equal to men because that is the way it is in civilized society. We are going to do the same. So he actually, back then, if you wore the hijab, if you covered up on the streets of Tehran, you would be put in jail. So the father of the Shah pushed the country in a very severe-handed, he had a vision, no doubt, but he pushed this vision down the throat of Iran. And Iran was not ready for that. The people of Iran did not arrive out of their own free will and their own evolution at a point to say, yes, a woman is equal to a man. Yes, a woman should have the same say as a man does. So when I was growing up in Iran, yes, that the surface was this liberal, westernized country where people are happy and dancing, but at the same time, which I was not aware at the age of 13 or 12, of course I wasn't, I was in love with Danya Osman. So no, I didn't know, but now that I'm a little older and a little more educated, I know that at the same time there was this undercurrent. So that fundamentalist, very rigid, religious, cultural mentality went underground at the time of the father of the Shah. It was forced to go underground. It didn't disappear. You cannot get rid of that mentality just by forcing it to go away. It cannot be forced. So it went under. And Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of this Islamic movement, he was forced into exile. Now, he was not the only opposition to the Shah at all. There were many leftist, many communist groups in Iran based in universities that fought the Shah fiercely. I mean, even armed conflict against the Shah. But the Ayatollah had this advantage that he could reach out to the average illiterate or maybe very slightly literate Iranian citizen at the time. In a remote village, when the communists basically had access only to the very literate university crowd, the Ayatollah could reach any Iranian in any remote part of Iran through a mosque and through his religious army at the time. He had been exiled, but the people who had the same mentality, they remained, and they kept spreading this very rigid mentality. Again, that which had not disappeared, but had just gone underground. So then what happened with the Islamic Revolution was that that undercurrent suddenly exploded and came out. And I think the mistake of people, like me, I mean my family, I was too young, but my family and religious minorities and the leftists, the communists, I think our mistake, all of us, was that we underestimated the strength of this tsunami that had been suppressed and kept under. And now it exploded. And we all thought, it's just a current, it's just a slight thing, it's not serious. I mean, they're just a bunch of illiterate religious people. They're just going to go away. And then 2-3 years after the revolution, they had put everybody in prison. My generation was basically in prison, religious minority. Well, as a Christian, you wouldn't go to prison simply, as a Baha'i, you would go to prison because you were Baha'i. But as a Christian, you wouldn't go to prison simply because you're a Christian. You would go to prison if you're a Christian who talks so much. So, if you advertised your religion or if you had political ideas against the government, then you would be put away. But I think this is now in a nutshell that I'm trying to explain a very complex, I can go back 2,000 years and begin there, and I promise you it will be very fascinating because Iran is a fascinating country. But this is just in a nutshell, just so that you understand those photos that you see are true, but they don't show you the underbelly.
So what you say perhaps is that the westernization of Iran, which was forced upon the country, would appeal to parts of the elite and the middle class, but there were huge undercurrents in which this was not grounded at all. So you had a good paving ground for the revolution.
Yes,
but
there was no foundation to it.
But so your family was not part of that elite. You were sort of middle class. Is that right perception? Yes. And you're not a political activist. You're a good student. you're going to become a medical doctor, but you really just can't accept people or teachers taking over your class trying to teach you Islam when you were supposed to read math. So your crime here, the speech that you're imprisoned for eventually, what speech is that? It's not an activist speech. It's not what we envision that people may be put to prison for saying like horrendous things against the government or really radical. You didn't do that.
No.
What did you say?
You know what, I think it actually, I try to remember which one was my first real, probably recorded act of defiance. And I think the very first one was when, after the revolution, the Iranian cultural revolution began. You know how it goes, you have a revolution, an ideological one, whether religious or not, doesn't matter. But then you have an idea, the cultural revolution following it. So the cultural revolution in Iran really attacked high schools and universities. Universities were shut down for about 3 years. But the high schools, they were not shut down, but the new governing body, the Revolutionary Guard, that now they own Iran, they own everything, they have money, they have guns. Back then they were new, so they sent their people, very rigid religious individuals, into schools, and these individuals replaced our very educated teachers that had been there during the time of the Shah. So these young, usually 18, 19-year-old women, because I went to a girls' school, they were not really educated, they were just religious fundamentalists, and they were there to brainwash us, the 14, 15-year-olds. So it was tough, and the dress code changed. I mean, before there you could wear the miniskirt, now suddenly the miniskirt was illegal. And I think the first incident that really made me, and you're 13, 14 years old, your hormones are raging like there's no tomorrow, and the last thing you need to blow is a good reason to blow. So think about it. I mean, your teenagers probably rebel against the color of the wall, but in my case, I had reason. I mean, one day I went to school, and the hijab, the covering, had already become mandatory. So I mean, that was hard to swallow. I mean, I hated looking ugly. I wanted to look pretty, and they had made it very clear to us that you are not allowed to wear makeup, and you are not allowed to pluck your eyebrows. Now, I was 14, I was not plucking my eyebrows yet, I was not even wearing makeup, so the whole dress code was annoying. But then a friend of mine who was a year or two older was walking with me to school, and the principal, a Revolutionary Guard in the complete garb of, the covering, was standing at the school door with a bucket of street water, like this is dirty, like basically sewage kind of water, standing at the door, and it had a sponge in it. And my friend who was with me, she was just beautiful, a beautiful girl. And she had beautiful eyebrows. And I testify, I still say it loud, she had not plucked them. She was just naturally beautiful. So the principal at the door looked at my friend and said, "You have plucked your eyebrows. How dare you?" And my friend said, "Miss, I haven't. Like, that's my eyebrow. No, I didn't pluck them." And then I came to my friends and I said, "She hasn't plucked them. I mean, that's how she is. She doesn't do." And then the principal grabbed my friend's, the back of her hijab, and pushed her head over the bucket and washed her face in sewage water in the bucket. I still, when I talk about it, I feel like I'm gonna vomit. And the shock, and my friend didn't come to school for a week after that. I think she got some eye infection or something, but next to that it was the shame, because this happened in front of everybody. And I think that was, when I think, this is where my memory goes, the moment that I became angry. And then, when the teacher, the calculus teacher, that she drove me nuts. She would come in the classroom and she would talk about dressing properly and not plucking your eyebrows and being submissive and not questioning anything and having to pray and this. And I just couldn't. It was like as if that pressure that I was feeling like a volcano, it was just, and it erupted. So I just stood up to her one day and I said, "What are you talking about? This is calculus. Talk calculus." So I think that was my second act, and then I walked out of the class and most of the students followed. But I became, I wasn't planning it, but I became the leader of the school-wide strike, which lasted 3 days. But I would, in my own mind, I would be the last person I would see myself as a political activist. It was just an angry, frustrated teenager who needed to get back to life, to the way things are supposed to be, and suddenly they have changed.
You sound like you have this very strong will, and you look around and you are outspoken, and you're 16 years old and you're sent to 2 years prison, in the political prison. Is it possible to describe to us, you've said something already, but is it possible to describe to us how your world turned upside down when you then were sent to prison together with political prisoners?
Well, I've already talked about the torture, and to be honest with you, I can do that so many times a day. So I think I'm absolutely at my limit. I think if I talk about the whole torture one more time, you'll have to call, whatever your emergency services are here right now, because I think I'm going to get literally ill. So I'm not going to talk about that part. I think I would prefer to talk about the prison life, because I think, people sometimes ask me, how did you survive? I mean, the torture, well, yes, sure, everybody is tortured. I mean, no problem. I mean, it's funny, it's actually funny. I can laugh about it now. When I look back, it's just so terribly violent and so terribly ridiculous that you sit down and you shake your head and you think, how did this happen? How did it become even normal to me? That when somebody says to me, I was tortured, I would say, yeah, sure, me too. It's like, okay, I went on holidays to Cuba, oh, me too. There's this bizarreness about it that I sometimes catch myself, and I have to hold my breath and say, oh my God, did I just say that? And yes, so suddenly you have to constantly remind yourself of the reality of your own life and what it has become. And the ridiculousness of it is still, after so many years, I mean, I'm 51 now, I was 16. But, life in prison, I think, once you got past the torture period, which could take usually days, so you would get past the interrogation. So interrogation usually, they beat you on and off for days. And then usually you were in solitary confinement and you received basically close to no food. Nothing. This is a dark place where you don't know if it's day or night. You have no idea what time it is. You have absolutely no contact except with the people who are beating you. And it becomes this dark black hole that sucks you in. And you begin to define yourself by the pain. A good day is when they beat you only for an hour instead of 3. I mean, it's a very bizarre state of mind. And then they sent me, after those days, that I don't know how many, I don't know, then they sent me to the cell block. And the cell block, my cell block, 246, it was an L-shaped hallway. So with cells on either side. Depending if you were upstairs or downstairs, it was either 7 cells or 6. Now, Evin was built during the time of the Shah. So during the time of the Shah, in each one of these cells, the public block, there were 5 or 6 prisoners. So the rooms were big enough for 5 or 6. But during my time, there were 50, 60, or 70 people in this tiny space. So the very first night I woke up in my cell, it was 2, 3 a.m. and I needed to go to the bathroom. And I looked around me and I couldn't go because there were people sleeping all around me like sardines. There was no space between them to put your foot on the floor and walk to the bathroom. So I stayed, and I knew that at dawn there would be the call for prayer, and then I wanted to go to the bathroom. So I ran, and then I was kind of too late because my feet were swollen and I couldn't go very fast. So I was number 302 in the bathroom line. So there are 300 young women standing in front of you, and for everybody is as urgent as everybody else So you better be able to have, expand your bladder or, whatever. So we are standing there, and these many, again, I mean, everybody had been tortured. Everybody was, but here we are standing in this hallway, and as we are standing, their names being announced over the loudspeaker that so and so and so and so come to the office. And the people who were called to go to the office, we knew that they would be interrogated, tortured, or executed. And again, just the fact that I can even say this out loud, it's shocking. Like even now, after I have written 2 books, I do this on a daily basis, but it still shocks me that we knew that if they call me, I might get shot. It didn't matter if I had a 2-year sentence, a 20-year sentence, no sentence. If they called you, you could possibly get shot.
Was this even, is it a detention center, or is it a prison? Or
It's
is
a prison.
It's a prison.
It's a prison.
So you were sentenced?
At that point, I was told that I had been sentenced to death. So it wasn't that I had attended it, because I had 2 trials. Basically, I had a trial that I was sentenced to death. Then I had a repeat of basically a retrial.
Okay. But
about 2 years
did you ever see the judge?
No.
No.
So this was in absentia. So my very first, I never even saw a piece of paper. I mean, they just told me, my interrogator told me, that I had a death sentence. And then he told me that he had reduced it to life in prison.
Oh,
And then,
nice of him. But that sounds slightly arbitrary.
it's very, it's not slightly arbitrary, it is absolutely and completely arbitrary. Now, nowadays in Iran, you see show trials on state television, but they are just that. They are show trials, and they are lawyers nowadays. Some prisoners, not all of them, they get lawyers, but
are these real lawyers, or are they?
They are real. Most of them are, but they are very brave people. Because those who dare, first of all, they cannot say anything they want. I mean, their access to information, to files, to all of that is extremely limited. And at the end of the day, they can only fight within a very limited system that tries to silence them. And then at the end, usually they end up in prison themselves. So we have had, so many. Actually, one of them now lives in Norway, Mohammed Mustafa, a dear friend who dared try to defend political prisoners and people who had been accused of ridiculous things, and he had to escape the country because they came for him.
So if you defend people in the wrong way, you're imprisoned yourself as a lawyer in Iran?
Yes, definitely. If you don't absolutely abide by the very strict, very narrow guidelines of the system, and if you say anything beyond that or try too hard to defend the prisoner, because the prisoner, basically, everybody knows that your sentence has already been decided. It's a known fact. When you go to trial, even when I got a retrial in Iran, when I went, and the courtroom was a tiny room, tiny. Tiny room. There was a Sharia judge sitting over there, and I walked in the room with my interrogator next to me, and the judge, the Sharia judge, and there was this other guy sitting there. I have no clue who that was, but the judge was drinking tea, and he offered my interrogator tea. And then basically they chatted with each other for like a minute and a half. And then they just said, okay, so she gets 3 years according to the new information. But the new information had not even been discussed. It was just absolute. So the judge had already decided, he had already made the deal with my interrogator that I was going to get 3 years.
Was this the interrogator that later sent you out of the prison, or?
Well, he didn't save me at all.
I realized that was
no.
wrong way of putting it. Please tell us this story.
Well, it was common, relatively. I still don't know to what extent, because people don't talk about it, and I don't blame them. It's very difficult, but girls were female prisoners, we were 15, 16-year-olds. Some of us, not all, but some of us would be forced to marry our interrogators or guards under threat. so they would threaten usually your family, your brother, your sister, somebody, and they would say, if you don't marry this guy, then, there will be consequences to that, especially to your family members, usually. And usually girls, said, okay, I'll do it. And I was just one of those girls that, my interrogator told me, you're going to marry me, and if not, I'm going to arrest your family. So I said, fine. And then he made me convert to Islam and all of that. But I remained a prisoner. I remained a prisoner. I wasn't released. This didn't mean, I was just being raped in solitary confinement, basically, under the name that I was his wife. I was 17, and I was a prisoner. I had no say. I was less than a slave. So this was a system that was basically in place, but nobody was really talking about what was going on. And then he negotiated because I had a life sentence, he negotiated to have my sentence reduced to 3 years. But when when I was given the news that my sentence would be reduced, I found it funny, because even if I was released after 3 years, I would have to go and live with him in his house. What kind of a freedom is that? The only advantage really of the situation was that my family were safe. That was my only gain. It was basically a trade. You do as I tell you to do, and you become my property. Well, I was his property anyhow, but to a greater extent, you become my property, and your family are safe. To me, that is under the circumstances, that was an okay deal, and I followed up. We did that. So he reduced my sentence to 3 years, but then before those 3 years expired, about less than 2 years before, about 3 months less than 2 years before, I had been in prison. So I had been in prison for about 20 months or so, 21 months. That was when he was assassinated by the rival faction of the government. And his family, who were a normal, average family, religious, but they were good people. They had never, he had taken me to visit them. And I accepted his mother to be the evil mother from Cinderella and to torment me. But she was decent, she was kind, she never yelled at me, she never was mean. In the slightest, she was kind, she was generous. And when he was assassinated, his family fought for my release. I think they bribed, probably, government officials. They were just good, kind people. And to them, torturing prisoners, political prisoners, was just. They are the enemy. You guys are the enemy. And with me, they believed that because I had converted to Islam, when I was told I had to convert to Islam, my sins had been forgiven. So according to their belief. So this made them, I guess, see me as their newfound daughter. And they fought for my release. They got me out.
You said once that torture rooms all over the world are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lecture, you compare the shoes from concentration camps museum in Germany and your own shoes that disappeared. Do you feel a strong obligation to tell your story also on behalf of voiceless victims all around the world? Do you see that there are lots of comparisons between your story and other stories, or is it very original or unique?
No, you know what it is? I really have to tell you that I do this for very selfish reasons. I have never been in my life a selfless person. It's just not my characteristic. I'm not. I like myself. And I like comfort. I have to say, I still love clothes and shoes, and I can't help it. I'm sorry, I try. And I love food, I love good food, I just love wine, I love the pleasures. And that's a fact. I'm not really the kind of material that you would choose to have a hero. Or I'm the furthest you can possibly get from a hero or anything like that. Anybody who would sacrifice, whatever. No, that's not me. So, I think, what happened was when I wrote my book, Prisoner of Tehran, the first book I wrote, it was because I was having symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress, is called the silent killer. So when I was out of the prison, there was no therapy available. I didn't even know what PTSD was. So it was years later in Canada, in the year 2000, that I had my first psychotic episode. And it came out of the blue, like my husband Andre, he's here. Actually, you cannot forget that, because I had been absolutely normal, calm, happy, easygoing woman. We had already had 2 kids, and this was in year 2000, so my younger one was 7 years old, the older one was like 12. And my mom and dad, we brought them to Canada, and my mother had cancer, she died. And my parents and I, we had never ever talked about the prison. It's just taboo, you don't talk about that stuff. And when my mother was dying, I sat at her bedside and I looked at her and I said, oh my God, who are you? I mean, we had only talked about the weather, ever. We had never talked about what really mattered. And then after her funeral, we went to my brother's house, also in Canada, so we were all in Canada. And I went to sit down next to my father, who they had been married for 50 years, and he was distraught. And my father, also very reserved, never talked about anything significant. Very proper. Great posture, he was a dance instructor. And I went to sit down next to him, and he looked up at me. He was so distraught. He lost it. He looked at me and he said, Marina, your mother forgave you before she died. And it hit me like a brick. I opened my mouth. I knew what he meant. You stupid girl, you ended up in prison, you brought shame upon the family, you made us all miserable, and there you are, your mother forgave you. So I opened even now that I'm talking about it, I'm getting upset after all these years. I opened my mouth to say, what do you mean? And this horrific, I'm not a very big person, this horrific scream sounded like an elephant just exploded, came out of me. And now I can laugh at it, but now it's funny. But there were all these people in the room, like probably the number that you are now, and they all moved back from me. My own husband, my own brother, my own father. They just created this clear area between them and me. So I'm standing here, they're standing there, and I'm screaming. And I realized I can't breathe. So I had lost control over, the scream was so urgent, it was more important than breathing, and I had lost control. So I panicked, and I needed to tell them, call 911, call the emergency, call the ambulance, call the doctor, and I couldn't articulate that, I couldn't breathe. So then I ran outside, I collapsed, and then my husband came, and a friend who's a doctor, and they shook me, and they put me in the car, and they drove me home. And the next day, I didn't even get a phone call to say, how are you? What was that? Are you okay? Nothing. Zero. And then after that, I would just have this urge to scream because it felt good, I suppose. That release. So I would go in the bathroom, I would lock the door, turn on the shower, and just scream. And then the feeling, it just became so strange. I had to bang my head against the wall. So I would just bang my head against the wall. And I guess for my family, it was a scary experience, but I had no control over my body. And that is how, then when I saw nobody was asking anything, and I was just getting worse by the day, I thought maybe if I write about it, I will get better. So I started writing, and then no, it didn't get better. I started taking writing classes, didn't get better. Then everybody said, well, everybody, not my family, but my friends said, Marina, maybe you should publish. I published. So my intention in publishing Prisoner of Tehran was only to find a cure. I wanted to be normal. And I thought if the book appears at a bookshelf, I will be normal. I always thought normal people have dogs. I don't know why I think that. I still think that. That I would go get a poodle and I would be a normal person. And then the book, went to the bookshop and I still couldn't go get a poodle. There was something about it that just didn't work. And I didn't feel any better. And that is when I started giving talks. And then I realized that when I'm working really hard and giving talks and writing and all of that, I have less time to lose my mind over it. I'm so engaged with being active. And the days that I was a little less active, I would get close to that screaming fit. So it was really my way to control my post-traumatic stress disorder. And then, I guess after that, one of my friends from Iran, we had been in prison together, she came to see me to Canada, just briefly. And she had connected with me. We hadn't seen each other since I was 16. And she went through her own ordeals, but she still lives in Iran. And she sat with me and she said to me, she said, Marina, because we had a mutual friend, Shahnush, who died at 15, she was executed. And she said to me that, Marina, I hold you responsible because you have a voice. I don't. You have to make sure that Shahnush is not forgotten. And I hated my friend for that. Even though I love her, I hated her. Because how dare you dump that responsibility on me? But then, because she's my friend and because she's right. She doesn't have a voice. I do. And it sucks. I hate it. I hate every minute of it.
But you've taken that responsibility.
Yes, but no, honestly, I have to say this, not out of the goodness of my heart. No. It's, it's like being haunted.
Yeah.
I cannot put this down. It just cannot be. It has become a part of me, and no matter how much I despise that, it's a fact.
But you are also now engaging in teaching literature and biography and storytelling. I guess your story also has changed over these years, that you feel that you maybe have some kind of not power over your own story, but that you can change it. And we know that from people telling their story about their illness, that it's kind of, you have typical stories and they change, and you can have a story about survival, or you can have a story about being a victim. So you can kind of use also biographies to tell stories. And have your story changed also over these years?
Yes, I suppose it has. In the sense that I still have difficulty to a certain way to, I know the difference between a victim and a survivor. I suppose I do. But to me, I find it slightly sugarcoating. I mean, when you say, and I'm wary of that, when you say survivor, it doesn't mean that you got a cure, that you're fine. It all worked out, you got tortured and raped, and half of your friends died, and now you're a successful writer, and you know what, you're okay. No, so I think that's a little bit of wishful thinking. I mean, I have lived in Canada for 5 years, I have become a Canadian, but I think in the West, in the East, everywhere, why do we kid ourselves? Anywhere in the world, we have a tendency to say, it's okay. And, by using words like hero or saint or brave, or I always feel the word brave is almost like an insult, because it robs the, I think a part of the experience of torture is the breakdown of the human soul. Not that it necessarily dies, but it breaks down. And I think the word hero kind of betrays that. The word brave betrays that concept. So I just, actually I have become even more aware. Again, the word victim doesn't cut it. Survival doesn't do it either. The experience is what it is. Now, all you learn to do, you don't overcome it. You learn to manage it. It's all about management. I always say it's like a backpack filled with rocks, but it is glued to you. You can pretend it's, but when you pretend it's not there, it's going to break your back because you're going to get off the chair in a way that you think it's not there, and it's going to break you. No, the rocks are there. Get used to it. You know, and I think, I have to say, maybe this is why my students love me. And, you know, I was at the beginning, when this University of Toronto gave me an award for teaching, I thought they were crazy. I'm a terrible teacher because I always go so bluntly at my students that they're like, whoa. But especially because a lot of my students are survivors of various kinds of trauma, I think they appreciate that. I don't go to them and say, oh honey, it's okay, you know, it's okay, don't worry about it. No. I go to them and I say, what happened to you was horrible. It was wrong, and you hurt, and you're angry, and you're upset, and you want to kill everybody. But whoa, let's sit down and write about it first, and we'll see what we're going to do after that. Calm down, let's just write. And then I get into the technicalities of writing, of the structure, of how this is done, and then people get distracted. They don't want to kill anybody anymore. And, you know, I find that comforting, that circle is very comforting, but it doesn't cure anything. That, again, I'm very of that whole victim survivor idea.
You say you become a Canadian, and you're certainly very eloquent, and you're very good at transmitting all these thoughts to us in a very nuanced and good way, I think. How is that culture of the Canadian, the US culture of talking about everything? And talking to everyone having a therapist, everyone talking about all the things that are on their mind all the time. How is the meeting between that and what you describe as a culture in your family of a taboo when it comes to talking about really traumatic things such as your prison experience?
You know what? I have to say that even though everybody has a therapist, and that in the Western Canada, I mean, we seem to be talking about things, we talk about nothing. And again, most of my students are not torture survivors from Iran. I mean, I've had students who are torture survivors from Iran. I had in my last course that I taught, I had a student from Egypt and a student from Syria. So definitely it was interesting working with both young women, and it was fascinating working with them. Actually, we really understood each other. But a lot of my friends, they were just Canadian. And various kinds of trauma, sexual violence, various kinds of violence in their lives. And when they enter my class, it takes like 2 or 3 classes, but then you see this release of information, of stuff that they have never been able to tell anyone. Not their therapist, not their mom, not the dad, not the spouse, not the friend. And I always assure them that what you say will stay in this classroom. It will not leave this class unless you want it to. Your secrets are safe. So I suddenly realized, you know, when I look around me, yes, people are talking all the time, but you know, those really hard things, they are never really openly discussed. And that is my impression. I really feel that we talk a lot about nothing. And we are shocked when somebody just throws everything in the middle. And we still, I mean, you know, again, like a lot of my students, they never talk about any of this, the truth of it, with anybody. And I think we have this belief that we are talking, that we are open, that we discuss everything, but we don't. That's me, but that's my impression. I might be wrong. I have been wrong before, many times. So.
No, I think that's, I mean, I think, you know, if anyone in this room is like me, I feel I recognize myself in what you're saying here. But what creates that space in your class, do you think? Is that the shared experience that you have, or is it that you talk to them in a different way than they're used to being talked to?
Yeah, I didn't even know what it was until one of my, I owe everything to my students, let me tell you that. I know my students, and they know that. And even the most difficult ones. So in one classroom, just to give you, in one classroom, I had 10 students, and one of them was a Christian pastor who was gay, And then the other one was a sex worker. A woman who was a sex worker and a drug addict. So I had this range of, and everything, and there was a woman who had lost all of her memories because of a disease, and then she was trying to regain. So, I mean, you can imagine how extreme that class would be. Very personal, it's memoir writing, so it's very personal. And the woman who had been a sex worker, she came up to me and she said, "You are the first person ever who looked at me in the eye and I didn't see any pity in your eyes. You don't pity me." I said, "Why would I pity you? Why would I do that? I mean, look at me. Look at who I am. Look at what I have lived. Who am I to pity you? If anything, maybe you should pity me, but don't, because I wouldn't like that." So I think it is that, I'm exposed. And I always tell my students, writing a memoir is like running in public naked. While we are in this class, we can keep it, but if you decide to go out there and run in public naked, I can run with you, but it's going to be very difficult. So I think it is that looking at each other in the eye and seeing each other for who we are. And not pitying, not putting ourselves above anyone, because I have been so low at a place where you cannot get any lower than that, and that kind of gives you perspective.
Is it also about listening? Because I feel that something happened with my listening. When you speak, I think about listening, because I think that people, they don't tend to listen. They tend to just say what they've already said and believe what they've already believed always, and keep to their dogmas and don't really take in what other people are saying. So you're also describing some kind of norms for engaging with people and trying to listen to their story. It's not only about telling, it's about listening as well.
That is true. The thing is that I believe, being dogmatic and not listening, really listening. Like, I don't mean, but I think you don't mean that either. That just be quiet and let the other person talk. I mean, that's important. But to really absorb what the other person is saying. I think when we don't do that, we are defensive. We are defending the identity that we and the society has created. We are defending that fictional, really, status of who we think and the society thinks we are. And to put that defense mechanism down, it's difficult. You really need to run in public naked, and that is really hard to do. But I have seen people achieve, slowly, but achieve that point. And it is a liberating thing. For every one of my students that I have watched them do it, it has been absolutely liberating. And they have done it at their own pace. Some of them have done it more quickly. Some of them have never managed. I mean, I have students that come to my class, it's rare, but that you don't see any progress. But it has happened. It's rare, but it has happened.
Your second book was about writing, your first book, or was it about the cost of writing, or was it about what you experienced after you've written the first book?
It's about all of that. I guess it started with when I published Prisoner of the Run, I started being called a whore and a traitor, it was difficult to digest, so I needed to tell the untold part of what are the consequences. When you actually decide to tell your story, a story that nobody wants to hear, you're going to pay the price. And, I think with Vigdis and working with women, a lot of people who called me a whore, they were women. That was troubling. So again, this comes to that listening, and I realized very soon that they were getting defensive. They saw my forthcoming as a threat to their own constructed identity. and I'm at peace with my completely devastated, crumbled identity. I didn't at all become what I wanted to become. And, you know, I can really use bad language here, but I wouldn't, because I usually try to be polite. But, you know, to put it, you know, in a polite Canadian way, they say stuff happens, and stuff happened, and here we are. So I have to deal with it.
When engaging, we'll continue for a couple of minutes. But when engaging in human rights dialogues all around the world, we regularly meet arguments such as Norway are quick in responding towards other countries and their abuses of severe human rights while overlooking violations in Western countries. Is that something you have reflected upon also and met?
Absolutely. I mean, my area of expertise, unfortunately, is very unfortunate. But it is, you know, but I do live in Canada. And usually students, when I speak for them, and, you know, I'm not talking about my own students at the university, I'm talking about high school students, because a lot of my talks are for high school kids. I give 2 high school talks a week during the school year usually. But the students, after my talk, they come to me and they say, what can we do? What can we do now? And I think their impression is that they have to sell everything they own and move to the Middle East and build a school for girls. And I think they come to me with kind of the hope that I would say, yes, 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 you should do that, but no, it's not. So I always tell them, you know what, guys, no, do it right here, right now. So look at your own community. I mean, in Canada, we have homeless people. We have newcomers to our country. We just took a large number of refugees. We have people who need very, you know, basically the refugee families that I work with, one of the main things that we have to do with them is that we have to show them how to use public transit. Just show them how to get on the bus, or on the subway, or on anything. Very basic. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. So I would say to the student, do you know how to get on the bus? And then the students look at me and they say, what? I would say, listen to me, look at my mouth. Do you know how to get on the bus? And then the students would, yes, of course I do. I said, okay, that's good, because we can use that. I need somebody to show newcomers, for example, how to get on the bus. Okay, and there are the students that said, no, I don't know how to get on the bus. I mean, my mother always drives me. I said, okay. Do you know how to make a sandwich? A sandwich? Yes. Can you make a sandwich? Of course I can make a sandwich. Okay. So there are people on the streets of Toronto who are hungry. So I'm going to give you the name of 3 organizations where you can go and make a sandwich. Do you think you can do that? And then the students would say, well, of course I can do that. I would say, okay, you just started saving the world. Now go get at it. So basically, that's what it is. You know, I think it is all about the small steps, no matter if it's in Toronto, if it's in Oslo, and I'm not that familiar with the problems here, but there is a way to help your own community.
I think that's great. It's a good way of rounding off, and we're just dwelling a little bit more on Iran, even though we cannot save it from here, and we should definitely start locally and try to do what we can do, rather than try to imagine helping the world at large. But Norway, as a humanitarian power, at least a country that likes to view itself as a human right power in the world, is there something that Norway as a country could do towards Iran today?
Absolutely. The government of Norway should be putting pressure on the government of Iran and other human rights abusers. I mean, let me put it this way. If you knew that, let's say, this is just a fictional scenario, okay, so don't take it seriously, but take it seriously, but not literally. If there is a shop at the street corner that you know the owner of the shop is a rapist, or who beats his wife every day, would you shop there? I wouldn't. And I know that many of you, if you knew, you wouldn't shop. Now, make it bigger. As a country, I just told you what was happening in Iran. Would you trade? It's kind of like going to a store. Really, it's just simplified. You wouldn't, because that's indecent. So what I would say is that if Norway wants to do trade with Iran, which, you know, if that shop has very nice shoes, I might be tempted to shop there. But I would go and tell the shopkeeper, listen, if you want to have my business, this is what you need to do. You have to stop this, you have to stop that, you have to apologize for this, you have to apologize. And then maybe you have to, you know, let your wife go and release her from your grip, you know, whatever. So, I mean, these conditions can be made. Nobody's saying Norway should not talk to Iran, or should not talk to Turkey, or should not talk to, you know, even North Korea. Sure, talk to them, but set conditions. I mean, you're in a position of power. Canada, I was just talking to the ambassador, it is in a position of power. Yes, we are going to lose some money, probably, but I mean, if all of us, if Canada, Norway, United States, Germany, France, you know, the list goes on and on, if all of us, we say to these people, no, excuse me, no. I mean, if you want us to do trade, which I'm sure you do, and we would like that too, I mean, it would be great, but we have to meet these steps, and, you know, we can, you know, put them at stages, these expectations, and I promise you it's doable. It's just that there needs to be a will. And in a democracy, every single Norwegian is responsible to put that kind of pressure on the government. Because a lot of governments think that the voters don't care about that stuff. So if you send a message to your government that you actually care about that stuff, then change will happen. Not overnight, but it will come.
Great, thank you so much, and I think that's a great appeal to all of us. Do make sandwiches, and do put pressures on our government to follow up on this advice. And we will not round this off by calling you a hero, but for being such a selfish person, you're doing that in a profoundly insightful and fascinating way.
I know that.